Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Discovery and the last Discovery of the year, in fact. So we have just some awesome presenters with us today, and I'm super excited that we get to host this webinar and host Victoria to talk about home labeling. So I am in a different location today. Some of you have met me before, some of you have not. I'm Allison. I'm the Director of Engagement with Efficiency Canada. I'm actually in balmy Winnipeg right now. It's -15 outside. So before we get going, I want to acknowledge that I am on the ancestral lands of the Treaty 1 territory, and that these lands are also the heartland of the Métis people. So I am actually right across the street from the Forks, which is a traditional and very relevant gathering space for Indigenous communities in this area. And I also want to acknowledge that the water sourced in this area is from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. So thank you everybody for joining us. I appreciate it. If you haven't joined us before, we host this every 2 weeks, and the idea is to learn together as a sector. So we bring people together to learn about new research, findings from pilots, different reports that have come out, even just relevant topics that are happening in the energy efficiency space. So if you're new, welcome. Before we get started, a reminder everybody as well that there is a question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. And you can also upvote questions. So if you see something you like in there, make sure to like it. And those are the questions that usually get asked first. So with that, I would love to extend a warm welcome to Victoria Charmé. She is the Manager of Home Energy and Adaptation Labeling with the Office of Energy Efficiency in Natural Resources Canada. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Victoria.
Thank you, Allison. Okay, let me just get this screen sharing straight, and then we can go from there. So, let me see. Share that.
Yep, you got it. Looks good.
And so are you good? Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Okay, let me just see here. Where am I? Okay, so yes, hi, and thank you everybody for coming today, and thank you, Allison, for inviting me to present on this national approach to home labeling. Like you introduced me, my name is Victoria Charmet, and I'm the manager of the Home Energy and Adaptation Labeling team in the Office of Energy Efficiency at Natural Resources Canada. The Office of Energy Efficiency has been involved in home labeling for a long time now, decades. As some of you may be familiar, we administer the EnerGuide rating system for homes, which has labeled about 2.5 million homes to date in Canada. And we see this national approach to labeling as an opportunity to reach even more Canadians than we already have, and ultimately increase the number of Canadians that have information about how their home uses energy and how they can make improvements to either their home energy's performance in their home, climate resiliency, or affordability, while also, of course, reducing emissions in the residential sector. So today I'm going to present to you a bit of context about how we got to this national approach to home labeling, what it is, and some of our next steps. And then I would appreciate all your questions and feedback on what we're doing. So this is a little bit of an outline of what I want to talk about today. So we'll talk about home energy labeling and energy efficiency, our EnerGuide rating system here at the department, the national approach to home labeling, current engagement that we're doing, and then I'll be putting up some discussion questions. So home labeling and energy efficiency. In Canada, it takes about 16% of all the energy we consume to power the 16 million residential buildings. And so home energy labeling and disclosure is a widely used policy across the world that can be used to increase the rate of retrofits, as well as ensuring that new buildings meet high standards. And home energy labels do this through lots of different ways. One is just increasing understanding of how each home uses energy and increasing kind of the way that people engage with energy efficiency. It can suggest retrofit choices that make sense for specific homes, make it possible to compare home energy consumption to similar homes, provide prospective home buyers or occupants with reliable information on home energy performance. It can integrate climate resiliency information and also collect from the energy label, collect data to be able to inform policy and program development. So there's a lot of useful aspects to home energy labeling and just home labeling in general. And this is not something that is new to Canada or new around the world. For example, in the European Union, they've had a requirement to do home energy labeling for about 20 years now at time of sale. And in Australia, they have a rating system, and as well as in the United States, they have their own rating system. So energy labeling is pretty prevalent in many different countries. So before I get too much into it, and I'm sure a lot of you folks on the call are already familiar with our EnerGuide rating system, but for those who are not, I just want to take a couple of seconds to explain what it is. So the EnerGuide rating system has served as Canada's standard for home energy assessments and label generation for over 2 decades. It provides a detailed on-site assessment of home energy use to generate a rating and customize recommendations for improving home energy performance. It's nationally recognized and trusted and by many different programs, and it's used by governments, utilities, industry partners across the country. For anybody on the call that's ever participated in a federal grant program or even a provincial or municipal one, you may have received an EnerGuide assessment as part of that. The process typically would look like you contact a service organization. They link you up with an energy advisor that comes out. They will collect data in your home, do a blower door test, and then speak to you about potential improvements for your home. And to generate the rating and the label, they enter this information into a kind of a calculator called Hot 2000, and that will generate the 3 reports here that you see on screen. So the label and reports is like a label with a rating scale. There's a homeowner information sheet that provides more details. And then the renovation upgrade report is where you get your recommendations on what you can do to improve your home. The other great part about this is that the data comes back to NRCan, and we can use this for program and policy design. So we have that tool. Now we're going forward with this national approach to home labeling. Why now? Well, part of the reason was in 2021, our department's minister received a mandate letter, and in that there was a commitment to require EnerGuide at time of sale. And we explored the potential of being able to do that. But as it turns out, the federal government does not have jurisdiction to label homes in Canada. This is really the jurisdiction of the provinces. And so what we did doing was really focusing on supporting partners and stakeholders adopt and implement home labeling across the country. And at the same time that was happening, or really maybe over the past few years, there has also been an evolution in the home labeling ecosystem in Canada. So more partners and stakeholders want to adopt home labeling and disclosure initiatives. Virtual home labeling services are emerging. And also we are hearing from partners across the board that they want to see improvement to our current EnerGuide system. So I'll speak a little bit more to each one of those 3 things right now. So in terms of home labeling initiatives across Canada, they have been gaining momentum, and there's a growing number of just jurisdictions that are looking at taking on home labeling policy commitments, pilots, programs, different things. And as you'll see on the screen, these are some examples of some of them. Many of these initiatives are taking advantage of virtual home labeling technology. And some of these initiatives have also received funding through NRCan's Toward Net Zero Homes and Communities grant program. So for example, BC, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI are introducing provincial pilots and programs. Edmonton, Calgary, Saskatoon, Toronto, Durham, Ottawa, they're developing their own initiatives, and it varies from energy disclosure maps, home retrofit portals, and other tools. And then Yellowknife and Whitehorse, they've had longstanding EnerGuide labeling requirements for new homes. So we can learn a lot from these initiatives, and we're working with all of these different partners to share information and insights on how their programs that are already in place and the ones that they're developing are moving forward. And our plan that we put forward right now has been informed by the work that they are interested in doing or that they're already doing. Now, with respect to virtual home labeling services, so over the last few years, several Canadian companies have leveraged emerging technology to develop new home labeling services, and they do this by combining building physics, data science, and web development expertise. These services can deliver information and labels to homeowners in a low cost and very quick kind of turnaround than a more traditional on-site assessment, such as the EnerGuide system. They, of course, have their limitations. So without a professional on site, we can't be totally sure of the information being collected to generate the accuracy, or sorry, to understand the accuracy of the label. And there's not, obviously, if there's nobody on site, there's not an opportunity for the same kind of level of energy coaching. And the other shortcoming right now for this, but we're hoping to learn more, is that in Canada, we don't have a lot of experience yet with the implementation of virtual labeling, like widespread virtual labeling. That said, we do believe that there's definitely a role for these tools, and they could, for example, they could be used to raise awareness about home energy performance, generally identify eligible participants or neighborhoods for energy efficiency programs. They could complement in-person assessments to provide customized retrofit recommendations. So there's potential in these virtual home labeling services, and yeah, we believe that they will play a role in the future of labeling in Canada. So alongside this, though, there's also a growing recognition from stakeholders and partners across the board that consistency across these virtual labeling tools is critical to inspiring confidence in them. And we feel it here at NRCan that we can play a role in supporting that. And I'll speak a little bit more to what we're going to do about it in a minute. That's just setting the tone. And then just on the EnerGuide rating system, like I said before, it's a nationally recognized and trusted brand. Lots of different partners and stakeholders use it as part of their programming or policy setting. And while it does have tons of strengths and benefits, we know that, we recognize that there are things that could be improved. For example, we've done some focus groups on the look of the label and the understanding behind it, and there are definitely improvements that can be made there. We've certainly heard that the time it takes to get a label can be lengthy at times. There are, in some areas in Canada, issues around availability of energy advisors. And so there's different issues that we definitely need to tackle. But what I should say is across the board, we're hearing from partners and stakeholders that they like the EnerGuide rating system and are really enthusiastic about supporting NRCan improve our current tool. So now I'll turn to just giving an overview of what our national approach is. So here are a few of the vision and the principles that we put forward in our discussion paper. So we released a discussion paper on home labeling in December. Not in December. In October, we released a discussion paper on home energy labeling, and it outlined a proposed vision and principles for the national approach. And the vision you'll see is written on the slide, and I'm not going to go through all of the principles, but really the overarching kind of direction that we wanted to go is play a supporting role in the adoption and implementation of labeling across Canada. And so this kind of outlines what our overall objective is. So in budget 2024, there was a commitment of $30 million over 5 years to continue developing a national approach to home labeling. And our initiative really aims to provide jurisdictions with the guidance and tools to implement home labeling programs that meet their needs, to foster consistency and comparability across all Canadian home labeling approaches, and then ultimately really to increase the number of Canadians that have information about how their home or prospective home uses energy and what they can do to improve energy performance, climate resiliency, and affordability. And you'll see here at the bottom that we have the 3 pillars of our national approach, which is a national home labeling guidelines, a virtual home labeling standard, and a simplified energy assessment. And now I'll get into specifics on what each of those are. So our aim for the guidelines is to offer best practices and guidance for home labeling initiatives, and this to support flexibility across jurisdictions and partners while fostering national consistency. And so the proposed objective for the guidelines are to articulate a vision for home labeling in Canada, provide guidance and recommendations, identify measures that are going to empower households to make decisions around retrofits, bring together best practices and examples of home labeling initiatives that are specific to the Canadian context, and then introduce new and redesigned tools and standards for labeling that also clarify the role of how those different tools to be used. The audience for the guidelines it's primarily jurisdictions and stakeholders, and we're hoping this will enable them to access consolidated guidance on recommendations and to recognize stakeholder roles and needs for home labeling. We're looking to have a first iteration of the guidelines out by spring 2025. And this first iteration, we're hoping, will set out principles for home labeling, outline the home labeling ecosystem and the roles in that space, and then begin to articulate a set of parameters for our home energy labeling and initiative. The second pillar of our approach is the virtual home labeling standard. And this will be a voluntary standard aiming to increase confidence and consistency in the information provided by virtual assessment tools. And the standard is going to set minimum requirements for public and private virtual home labeling services and assessments. And The proposed objectives for the standard are to encourage consistency, support confident decision-making as these virtual labeling initiatives are developed and implemented, promote and support innovation, while certainly prioritizing feasibility, identify user privacy and protections, and discourage ineffective services in the market. And then finally is our simplified energy assessment. And with this, we're aiming to create a simplified assessment that's based on EnerGuide, but that will respond to many of the needs and requests that we're hearing from partners, stakeholders, and just all the feedback that we're getting on EnerGuide. I have to admit that right in this moment, I'm not sure whether simplified is the right term to be using to describe this, because simplified makes it seem like we're really, I don't know, that it's going to be maybe not tackling all of the issues we're still in the process of kind of scoping what we can tackle more immediately and what is more long-term things that we can improve on with EnerGuide. But the proposed objectives for the assessment are to support jurisdictions seeking new tools and support their initiatives, assist homeowners who have virtual labels and want to validate retrofit options or the information from the virtual labels, strengthen the ability to meet labeling demand across Canada, provide a faster assessment than the current EnerGuide label, and then leverage the EnerGuide network, energy advisor service organizations, to deliver assessments that are professionally verified and also have homeowners have the opportunity to get energy coaching from these professionals. So we will launch engagement on, and I'll speak a little bit more to engagement after, but we're going to be launching engagement on this in the new year. And I should have said, on the virtual labeling side of things, we're looking at having a first iteration of the virtual labeling standard out by spring 2025, as well as the guidelines. So just for our current engagement and collaboration with partners and stakeholders is really fundamental, because obviously we want to be in a supporting role in home labeling. And so the engagement that we're doing now is building on past engagement. Some of this was done through the Canada Green Building Strategy engagement in 2022 and 2023. And then we started a provincial territorial municipal working group in 2023. And we've been meeting with them every month, every 6 weeks on our approach. And now, starting in September, we started doing more broad engagement with all of our stakeholders, and we're looking to continue that into future years. And this is a little bit of a breakdown of what our engagement has looked like. So on the national guidelines, like I suggested, we've been meeting with our provincial territorial municipal working group. We've met with national Indigenous organizations. We have been holding many different stakeholder meetings over the past couple of months, and we intend to have a roundtable discussions over the next few days, next week, with some industry organizations and other players in the more industry space, with the hopes of, like I have on the slide there, we'll be putting out a draft of the guidelines for public review in early 2025 to be able to put out our first iteration of them in the spring. On the virtual home labeling standard, we have a couple advisory teams helping to move the standard forward. And so that includes a virtual home labeling services advisory team, as well as a provincial territorial municipal one. And like with the guidelines, we're hoping to have a draft of the standard out in early 2025 for public review, and then a first iteration of the standard out, so more final version in the spring 2025. And finally, on the simplified energy assessment, we are currently, as I suggested, scoping the work and seeing what we can get done over time and what that looks like. And then we are anticipating engagement is going to start on that in 2025, so early next year. So as I suggested, we had put out a discussion paper, which we can share with anybody interested. They could reach out to Allison and we can certainly share it with you. And it has a few questions in it. They're pretty high level questions. We're trying to get feedback that would influence kind of our policy direction on this. So this approach that we're putting forward, do you see it as the right role for the federal government? What do you see as your own organization's role in labeling? What are opportunities and challenges in this space? Did we set forth the proper guiding principles for widespread home labeling? And are there other areas that we're missing? So these are in the discussion paper. that we would be welcome to share. And then what we are seeking from anyone who wants to provide us with input is to send it to our home labeling mailbox, like email, by December 31st, if you have feedback. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So maybe I will stop sharing my screen. And
Fantastic.
yeah.
Thank you, Victoria.
No problem. Thank you.
So a lot of information. And
Yeah.
as Victoria mentioned, it sounds like there's going to be some iterative engagement happening. My first question is there somewhere that people can go online right now to look at this, or is it by request only?
So right now the discussion paper is by request only. We may eventually be able to put it online, but right at this moment we're not in a position to do that. So, but if they were to, it's probably easiest because they have your email probably. If they wanted to reach out to you and just let me know, then that would be great. We could send it to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to do that.
The other option too is maybe if participants wanted our generic inbox, like a copy of our generic inbox, like our email, then they could email that too, and we could get back to them.
Yeah, fantastic. I know you had that on the last slide, so maybe we've got a couple other folks in the background. So maybe Victoria or Alex, if you wanted to put that email into the chat for everybody, that would be really helpful. Okay, so I mentioned it at the beginning. Anybody who's got some questions for Victoria, you can put them in the question and answer box. We've got a couple really good ones in there already. So let's get started on those. And I also want to acknowledge there is some really great stuff in the chat right now. And I appreciate all the comments in the chat. So thanks, keep that up. It's great to see. So a question about emissions and the different sort of changes that you were mentioning. Right now, how much does the home energy labeling take into effect emissions? And do you see that changing in the future?
Right now, our EnerGuide label certainly like speaks to emissions, like GHG emissions. I don't necessarily see that changing in the future. What I'll speak to is, so we already cover energy use in our current EnerGuide label, and then we have GHG emissions as well. What we have been hearing from focus groups that's been interesting is that they are also interested in seeing more costing information on the label. So that could look like energy savings in terms of dollars, or the cost of different retrofits. How could we incorporate that kind of information into it? And so it may look like, and we're still trying to see what we're actually capable of doing, but like an updated, like say, version of the label could include more on energy costs. That seems to be where homeowners would like to see more information. So I don't know that we would change anything too much on the emissions or the energy use side, but yeah, that's what we're hearing right now. Oh, I think you're on mute. That's okay.
Oh my gosh, I'm guilty of doing it today. That was actually going to be one of my follow-up questions. Is it would be really interesting to hear. So you said that you had received some feedback through the green building strategy. Was there anything that stood out from that really shaped what you've put out to date, the discussion paper specifically? Like, what were some of the big barriers or some of the positive feedback that you heard that shaped this discussion paper?
Yeah, I think that we heard back that home energy labeling, that folks felt that it was important. But I think that we've also been hearing, and not just through the Canada Green Building Strategy, but just generally through some of our programming too, because we, of course, had our Greener Homes grant program running for a while, but there was definitely challenges around the delivery of the EnerGuide program, and some of just the shortcomings around like the quick turnaround of the EnerGuide assessment, and also just a bit like the scalability of it, because in some regions it is harder to get an energy advisor, which then can drive up cost in some cases as well. And so I think it was mostly around that space, like what could we improve on in terms of our own EnerGuide system. I don't know that it spoke too much to the virtual services. That I think we've been hearing mostly just because so many jurisdictions across Canada are looking into that approach. That's what's influencing our direction there.
That's fantastic. Thanks. I think it's always nice to hear that as these initiatives move forward, you're counting feedback previously, and that sort of it is a narrative that moves forward, and there are different sections of the Office of Energy Efficiency that are informing each other. So that's really great to hear. This is an interesting question. So labeling has typically been for, I don't know what this acronym stands for. So if anybody wants to write it in the chat, go for it. Maybe you do, Victoria. SFH, single family homes, I'm guessing. Will we also see labeling for apartments, condos, stratas?
Yeah. So we right now are still scoping the work that we're doing on the national approach within Part 9 buildings. So we're talking like single family homes attached, so 3.5 stories or less, that kind of range. That is what EnerGuide covers currently. So yeah, so I would say it's not to say that there isn't a need in the other space. So I guess what I'll say though is that for now, that is what we're trying to tackle is that space.
And probably not to discount the fact that since you're asking questions and you do have an open consultation right now, maybe it's a little C consultation, that if people do have feedback on that, or they wanted to see that, or they could even help to articulate what that could look like, it doesn't discount anybody from providing that feedback.
Not at all. Not at all. And I would encourage you, like anybody on the call, that if they would like to provide us feedback because they feel like there are gaps in the approach that we're putting forward, we would be happy to hear that. Part of what we put forward, we think, is a manageable scope of what we can do immediately. And then we're gonna, I would imagine we hope to grow on this. We're taking a similar approach so Australia has a very similar federal provincial kind of relationship in terms of jurisdiction as Canada does. And so we've been taking lessons on the way that they've approached things. And what's really nice to see with them is they have put out different iterations, and this is the approach that we're taking with like putting out a first iteration of the guidelines that may be more light, but in a few years' time, we're hoping to be able to learn from that and build on the kind of advice that we can give around home labeling. And we've seen with Australia, they've been able to advance that over the past few years. And so yeah. So if there are things that we're missing, we'll definitely take them into account. Please let us know.
That's a very modern approach to doing this work. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So this is I think it actually speaks to the answer that you just gave about a manageable scope right now. So maybe I'll ask a general question before I get into these more specific questions. Is there any intent through this work to look at the labeling system that banks use or mortgage requirements to have home labeling? Is the intent of the question. And then there's a couple of more specific questions there, but it'll depend on your answer.
Yeah. So we did look into what we like, if the question is trying to get at if there was different ways the federal government could take more of a requirement role through some of those policy levers, or that the kind of, I don't know whether they're levers, but different kind of actions that the federal government could take around mortgages or around other kinds of financial pieces, owning and purchasing and houses. We did explore those and they were not feasible options. And the reason for that mainly is because a lot of the guidelines and I don't know how to explain it, but the requirements in that space are really to protect the financial stability of the system, and to go in and try to insert home labeling in there for energy purposes. It's not to say that I certainly feel that home labeling is very important, and if we could, we would have gone that approach. But it turns out that it's not a feasible approach to try to make home labeling part of that requirement, because there isn't a really direct linkage with the financial stability of the housing sector. So that's kind of like a maybe not great way of explaining, but we certainly looked into what we could do in that space. I'll add to that by saying that we also felt that there was just a lot of jurisdictions in this space already doing home labeling work, and each taking different approaches that were like really different kinds of very progressive approaches. And so I think we felt that if we're going to put our energy into something, it makes more sense that we're trying to support and learn from all these different ways that different jurisdictions are doing it, than to come in over top. But in any case, we couldn't really do that anyways. So yeah.
I'm sure we could do an entire webinar on that topic alone. Maybe one day. So, and this is, I think, an addendum to that question, and maybe just a different part of the system. So when homes are listed on the MLS system. I'm not sure if that's within the federal government's jurisdiction to be able to require that. Certainly, I think there's a voluntary component as well. And it sounds like the government is really going sort of the carrot, if you will, approach instead of the regulatory stick approach. And so is there an intent to potentially work with realtor associations or the MLS system in a voluntary manner and explain benefits there? Yeah, is that one of the approaches that you're considering as well?
So we have definitely been talking with folks from the real estate sector, so like the Canadian Real Estate Association, and we'll see. I think, and I don't exactly want to be speaking on their behalf, but I think that they are interested in engaging with us on this and seeing where we can work together on it. And so I think that that's to come. I think we need to put out like this standard and take on the work that we've outlined so far, and then as I think that progresses, we'll be able to have a better sense and be able to work with them to see how that involves like MLS and all those pieces. But they have been very open to engaging with us, and so it's been very positive so far.
Yeah, what I'm really hearing is that this is going to be an evolving conversation over the next few years. And honestly, from the questions and the feedback I'm seeing, I think there are a lot of people that are really interested in this. So it should be a really great evolving discussion over the next few years. This is the question I was going to ask. Liz, you have all the great questions. I had actually written this down in the background. So I'm curious to know, and Liz is curious to know, there are a lot of jurisdictions in Canada that are either considering or have implemented either mandatory or voluntary building performance standards. So how do you see this playing in that space? And are those some of the stakeholders that you're consulting with? Talk a little bit about that.
Sorry, ask the question. Are we consulting with folks in the new build space? If maybe
so mandatory building performance standards. Vancouver has implemented mandatory building performance standards. Yeah, and so I guess maybe just curious about how the home labeling would affect those standards or those jurisdictions.
I think I'm not sure that it would affect them. I guess what the hope is that if the buildings are meeting these standards, that home labeling would be able to reflect that in a way that's like really easy for potential purchasers or current homeowners to be able to understand that. I think home labeling is really there, like, at least I guess how I see it, is that it's there to support anyone who wants to take those actions and make them seem and put a value to them in a sense, because sometimes when you do go to all that extent to either improve the energy performance, like a city doing it for more of an overall standard, or just even a homeowner trying to do themselves, it's not always recognized. And hopefully with home labeling, not only does it just make it easier for people overall to just understand energy efficiency and bring attention to it, but that people that do invest in additional insulation or different kinds of more efficient equipment, that they can make this kind of these improvements, these investments more obvious.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think there's a lot of space for a national lexicon about this and a lot more awareness building, which sounds like some of the different approaches you're taking are going to support. And for standards, especially around the virtual audits, that's something that's come up in just the past few years. So I think that's necessary. Although I'm sure people would debate me on that. So. Okay, I like this question. How is, or maybe it isn't, but when you think about an ESG report, how is that accepted by building labeling in Canada currently? And do you see that changing at all?
What was an ESG report? Maybe I'm not exactly sure how to answer that. Like an ESG report received by whom or who would like. I guess I'm just wondering what the context of that would be. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, fair question. And there is not much more context in the question. So Lucas, if you want to email, I think the email should be in the chat right now. So if you want to ask that question, I would say email the folks at NAHL, and you can probably get into it there. Okay, let's just move on to another quick question. So I think with the closure of greener homes, or at least the previous iteration, there were a lot of energy advisors as part of that program. So what do you see their role in this, and how do you think it will impact the use of energy advisors across the country?
Yeah, for sure. So what I and so I totally understand where they're coming from. I've been working in this space for a long time, so I've seen grant programs start and end and start and end. So I think what we're hoping to do with this, the overall national approach, is to create a more consistent, how can I explain it? Like a more consistent, I don't know whether the approach is the right word, but to home labeling in the sense that we're trying to generate more interest in this space. And I don't know whether it's going to roll out exactly like this, but what we're hoping will happen is that if more jurisdictions are taking on virtual labeling approaches to it, that this will generate interest within those jurisdictions from homeowners who want to know more about the energy use of their home. And this will incite more people to want to get labels get in like an on-site assessment because they'll be interested. They'll receive a virtual home label potentially, or be able to access one through their jurisdiction, and then say, oh, this is really interesting. Maybe I should be considering this. If I'm going to do a renovation, maybe I should look more deeply into this, make the investment of having somebody come on site and really give me advice on how to approach this. And because I would say that I don't know that there's been a lot of promotion around on-site energy audits beyond grant programs. And I'm really hoping here that there'll be an opportunity through what we're putting forward to just generate more interest and more demand for labeling in a more consistent and steady way over time. But having said that, if there's anybody out there who wants to provide any advice on what they think the right approach to that would be, or how we can build on our approach to do that, I'd be very happy to hear it.
For what it's worth, I think disconnecting it from incentive programs is really smart, because the incentive programs are typically the programs that we see not get recapitalized. I am sure everybody on this call has seen that happen multiple times within provincial and federal jurisdiction. I used to work for Energy Efficiency Alberta, which was there one year and gone the next. So yeah,
For sure.
I really like this question. So it talks about implementing a new labeling system, which we've heard is not in the federal jurisdiction. It is in the municipal provincial jurisdiction. But this is more about the incentive and the motivation. So what do you see as the biggest catalyst in implementing a new labeling system if there are interested jurisdictions?
The biggest catalyst for implementing, geez, I'm not sure that there's one big. I know that the jurisdictions that are doing it right now are doing it for a variety of different reasons. So that some of this is for climate planning, some of it is for affordability purposes, so around informing folks about their energy use and how to reduce their energy bills. So I think that there are potentially lots of different angles. The data piece of it has been really important to a lot of our stakeholders as well. So I don't know. I don't know if there's like one major thing, but there are lots of different advantages to labeling. And through our provincial, territorial, municipal working group, we're really able to have those different jurisdictions share what their different objectives are and their different approaches to that. So if there are municipalities on this call, we do have representatives for every province on our calls. But if there are other municipalities that would like to engage in our working group, we would be happy to have them as part of it. So yeah, so just let us know.
Okay, fantastic. So again, we have run up against the constraints of time, as we always do, and there are too many questions to answer, which is awesome. And I love to see that. And it means that people are really engaged and interested in this. So as you heard Victoria say, this is the beginning of, I think, a broader round of consultation. I just wanted to clarify a couple things on the engagement before we all take our Fridays and go into the weekend. So there's the discussion paper out now, and I think those are the questions that you shared. And then there's an intent to release the guidelines and the virtual home labeling standards in spring. So will there be additional engagement on those documents? Will it be a separate piece? Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like and how you see people getting involved and engaged in that?
For sure. So what we are hoping to do right now is for the guidelines and for the standard, We anticipate going out for public review of those documents in early 2025 before this first iteration, which is more of a final version, it goes out in spring. So I would suggest to anyone, because right now we're hoping to put that all online, and so it would be there. But if you would like to know when it goes out online, we have a list of different stakeholders that we would let them know that we, like, for example, that we sent the discussion paper out to. So I would encourage you to reach out to our inbox right now if you would like to be updated on the release of those things. And then similarly, if you are interested in providing input on the simplified energy assessment and where we're going with the EnerGuide, you can email us at the same address and let us know if you would like to engage. And we'll see how we pull that all together. We're still trying to determine how we're engaging on the EnerGuide piece of this right now.
Yeah, totally fair. Thank you. And just know Efficiency Canada is here to help if you need anything. Yeah. I'm sure we'll have great conversations about that. Okay, so we're going to close for the day. I did put I think it was posted previously as well, but I put the email address that you can all get the paper from. It's in the chat. So if you don't get it, send us an email. I'm happy to share it again. And just to thank everybody for joining us today and throughout the year. As mentioned, this is the last session for the season. We will be starting again in January. Our executive director, Corey Diamond, is going to join us to talk about a little bit about what we saw in the past year in terms of energy efficiency, energy poverty trends, and then what we're anticipating in the new year. So the new year is going to be full of changes, I think. And Corey's going to talk a little bit about what we see in terms of policy, as well as trends at the federal and provincial and even the municipal level. So we invite you to join us in the new year for that. It will be on the website soon. It's not quite there yet, but thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Friday. Have a wonderful holidays. I hope you all get to take some time off, and we will see you in the new year. Thank you so much, Victoria, for joining today. It was very informative, and I'm looking forward to seeing everything in the new year as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.